This video is an introduction to the concepts and logic of the St. Mark's Character and Leadership Education Program. The program is in its 11th year. The concepts and logic are important because our program isn't just some extra projects that we coach the boys through, but rather an attitude toward their lives now and looking forward to their future. The boys need to understand and accept why they should cultivate this attitude, or the program won't work for them. The program starts with the world and what it needs, not with the self and what it may or may not value. The world has an acute need for people who can coordinate the activities of others toward shared goals. In families, in businesses, in political organizations, in civic organizations, in friendships, that's the need. And we want the boys to see that because they live in and enjoy the world with this acute need, responding to that need is their fundamental responsibility. Because we are social beings, society's interest and our own interest have such overlap as to be ultimately inseparable. And this responsibility is also the boys' greatest opportunity, as their efforts toward engaging, serving, and coordinating well the shared interests of their family, businesses, friendships, places of worship, civic organizations will make or break their lives and can provide them with extraordinary purpose and meaning. So the need, the responsibility, and the opportunity are the same. And that daunting but vital fact forms the bedrock for our logic to motivate and educate boys to build their skills as men and leaders going forward. We think it is helpful to address the question the boys often ask of why we don't just naturally become the people and leaders that we could, if it is in our own interest to do so. Why must we work at being ourselves? Why aren't we already our fullest selves? Fair and good questions. The short answer is that our instinctual reactions evolve very slowly, but that social interrelatedness and complexity have recently evolved with astonishing rapidity. Our instincts were generally formed to forage on savannas with a dozen blood relatives. Our urbanized global social reality today presents us with radically different challenges. That gap between our instincts and our needs, responsibilities, and opportunities is the reason that we need to educate boys in character and leadership intentionally. Education in building leadership and character is thus training in a second nature that is more adequate to the realities of our social world today than our first nature. To prepare themselves for the needs, responsibilities, and opportunities in their lives as men, the boys need to train their heads, hearts, and hands, or their understanding, their feelings, and their experience. Without all three aspects, character education won't work. As a 1 through 12 school, we have the opportunity to help our boys develop all three. In their heads, the boys need to be fluent in an ethical vocabulary, to discern reality from false images of reality, and to articulate, explain, and defend answers to the vital questions of what makes a man a good man, what their responsibilities are, and what the differences between ethical and unethical action are. At St. Mark's, we make a distinction between real leadership and mere authority. Leaders move their communities forward in their missions from whatever place they have in those communities, and they do so inclusive of everyone's well-being and in sustainable ways. Leadership is an attitude, what we call the habitual attitude of entrepreneurial service, always looking to make the most positive difference possible in every situation. At St. Mark's, we understand character and leadership, and thus character and leadership education, as essentially intertwined. We understand a boy's growth toward leadership as a process that begins with engaging a community, grows into serving that community, and matures into coordinating the efforts of members of that community toward its shared goals. Each stage of leadership calls upon greater degrees of character from the boys. Because each boy has different interests, passions, talents, and schedules, not every engagement of his will evolve into the more full responsibilities of service or coordination. That said, we do heartily encourage each boy to throw himself as fully as he can into attending to his world and his energies, passions, and skills allow, knowing that his life as a good man will demand of his character the abilities to engage, serve, and coordinate at high levels of mastery. We understand ethics in the root sense of the Greek word as the repeated and sustainable habits that lead to thriving for communities and individuals. To thrive in their lives as men, the boys will need to learn to be ethos builders, creating cultures of thriving at home, at work, and in their greater communities. We strongly advocate virtue language and conceptuality rather than value language, because we think value language is overly subjectively relativistic. At the most basic level, our program tries to discern the qualities and skills that the boys will need to thrive as men, and to help the boys to develop those qualities and skills. We do not think that character and leadership education is primarily about teaching the boys to attain whatever they happen to value. Empathy and compassion are virtues, qualities men need to care for their people properly. They are not mere values that one might pursue or not. The world has realities that transcend our wishes and whims, and we aim to prepare the boys to meet those realities with highly developed skills. Though we don't have the time to define them in this forum, here is a list of virtues that we take to be central to leading communities in our world, so we want our boys to understand them and to use them. There are many more, but these are some that are central. Studies confirm again and again that young adults today have a working ethical vocabulary of close to 0 words, and so we insist that the boys actually learn what these key virtues mean in order that the boys can think, reflect, and speak in ways that move their communities forward. Teaching the boys the distinction between external goods and internal goods is essential to our program. Teachers and parents often complain that kids are not as intrinsically motivated as they should be, but we have found that unless we teach to them what intrinsic motivation actually is, most of our boys do not understand the distinction well at a conceptual level. External goods come from outside of one's effort and are generic. A boy can earn $5 by making 5 free throws in a row, or for shoveling the sidewalk, or many other activities. It's the same $5. Internal goods, however, come from within the good of doing something skillfully, in particular, mastering complex practices, such as editing a newspaper, parenting, architecture, or many, many other things. We want the boys to see that as nice as money and popularity are, they will spend most of their lives as men doing. And the earlier they see the huge possibilities of meaning within mastering complex activities, the more likely they are to achieve that meaning as men. One of the most effective teaching moments we have comes when we teach this distinction and ask the boys how much money they might accept someday in exchange for being a bad father to their children. Most boys have heard hundreds of times that, quote, there are things more valuable than money, unquote. But often it seems that this moment is the first time that many of them really get a sense for what that something might be. The internal goods of good fathering seem to them on an entirely different scale than money. They wouldn't intentionally be a bad dad for any amount of money. They realize in this moment that there is indeed something more valuable than money, and it is fulfilling their most important responsibilities. The conceptual category of narrative goods is nearly always new to the boys. Narrative goods are closely linked with belonging and coherence, and arise from being able to locate ourselves in space and time in the world through the true stories that we can tell of our interactions with it, weaving together our past, present, and future. Narrative goods are closely correlated with our involvement in communities, which often help us to generate stories that serve as breadcrumbs and arrows on our trail and help us realize that the world matters to us and that we matter to it. The boys really go to town with the distinction between hedonia and eudaimonia, both Greek terms. Hedonia is happiness as pleasant feeling. Eudaimonia, literally good spirit, is a deeper happiness that really isn't a feeling, but rather the deep meaning, contentment, belonging, and power that can only come from the momentum of accumulated mastery in a full life of responsible, virtuous activity. It is challenging teaching the concept eudaimonia to boys because by its nature it is something only a mature adult can fully know. But it is usually not too difficult to find some area in which a boy has already dedicated himself virtuously toward mastery of some activity that allows him to begin to imagine a whole life filled with that practiced mastery versus a life of mere passive, pleasant experiences. We like the English word thriving as a close approximation to eudaimonia, primarily because it keeps the sense of happiness as essentially positive, active doing. As we developed the program, we discovered that our boys were graduating with almost no way of discussing what a self is, which is an odd thing to have little to say about. So we study elements of selfhood with them that seem most relevant to learning ethical effectiveness. There isn't time to get into the self much here. but here's at least a gesture. We talk about the self as a web of social roles, asking the boys to draw the web of all of their roles, and seeing how much of their lives hinge on the health of the micro-communities that support the roles through which they live out their lives. We discuss the self as its telos, the most complete man that a boy can realistically imagine himself becoming. Our telos acts consciously or subconsciously as a target that we move toward, so it is important that we imagine the best one that we can. We discuss the self as its character, which we define as a self's capacity to care effectively. Good men spend most of their days caring for other people, so it is vital that the boys realize that they need strong character. Drawing upon their newfound understanding of virtues, we ask the boys to self-evaluate as to what their character strengths and weaknesses are, and we encourage the boys to put their strengths more to use to lead their micro-communities, and we encourage them to shore up their weaknesses. Finally, we discuss the self as its narrative. We ask the boys to tell their story and to reflect upon it, especially how the telling of their full story necessitates telling the stories of their family, their school, their parents' careers, their place of worship, their teams, their city, their country, and on. In paying attention to their story, they see how the separate individual they thought they were is actually extraordinarily dependent on the health of their communities, which highlights in the most tangible way the overlap of the need, responsibility, and opportunity for them to learn how to care for the communities that form the basis of their lives. From that place of understanding, we ask the boys to consider their future story and to articulate how they will prepare to become the ethos builder, the ethical leader that their future world needs them to be. So the logic of our program is to get the boys to realize that the life of a good man is spent caring for other people and leading communities through defined social roles. In the life you plan on living, you're going to wake up to a spouse or partner and children who need your care. After a short commute to the office, you're going to care for clients and coworkers, bosses and subordinates, and then after another short commute, you'll return to your family. And let's not forget your friend whose business or marriage is on the rocks and who needs your care. Let's not forget the call from your church, synagogue, temple, or mosque that they need a new roof, or the call to chair a committee to raise money for a new pediatric care facility at the hospital. This is the life that awaits our boys as men. It is a tough, demanding life. They aren't ready for it yet, and they need to prepare for it. We are helping them to prepare for their challenging future lives as men. Our program is not pie in the sky, it's not touchy-feely, and it's not a guilt trip about privilege. It prepares the boys to become the men their world needs them to be. So if their lives as men are going to entail caring for other people in various ways for about 95% of their waking hours, then what would a life of thriving involve? Well, if men give care for the vast majority of their day, then it is vital that the boys learn to be present in that care, or they won't be themselves. If men give care for the vast majority of their day, then it is vital that they be skilled at giving that care, or they won't be good at being themselves. If men give care for the vast majority of their day, then it is vital that they look forward to giving that care, or they won't enjoy being themselves. Enjoying being good at being themselves. That is thriving. That was all the head. Now the heart, the habits of responsive feeling. Here's our list of central virtues again. We teach the boys to understand these virtues conceptually, but it is even more important that they develop these virtues as responsive feelings in their lives as habits. Again, we don't have time in this venue to discuss all of these virtues, but in particular, we want the boys to become empathetic and compassionate young men. Empathy, literally feeling with another person, and compassion, owning the feelings and life outcomes of others as one's own, are extraordinarily expansive human abilities. Because the logic of our program does not rely upon abstract moral rules, but rather the overlap of the interests and outcomes of self and communities, empathy and compassion are the central capacities that allow the boys to expand themselves to better identify with the interests of their families, friends, classmates, teammates, people from Dallas, America, Earth, and we hope, ultimately, to be concerned for the well-being of all living beings. Now the hands, the experience of actually engaging, serving, coordinating, and problem-solving. Besides understanding conceptually, and developing helpful responsive feelings. The boys need hands-on experience to learn actually how to care for their people and communities. Because leadership as we teach it is not limited to authority positions, opportunities to lead permeate the boys' days in their classes, teams, clubs, at home, and in their co-curricular activities, but also in their opportunities to serve Greater Dallas. Though coaching certainly helps, there is no substitute for their growth as leaders than to try to lead. Ultimately, the boys learn to lead by leading. So one of our main goals is to get them as many opportunities to lead as possible. It helps to have specific targets in mind for skill development, and we focus on the 3 elements of leadership: engagement, service, and coordination, and a 4th, problem solving, that pervades the other 3. We'll run through these very quickly to give you a sense of the skills that the boys will be learning. The skills of engaging, among them responding, respecting, including, cooperating, and collaborating. The skills of serving, among them advocating, mentoring, cultivating, providing, and protecting. The skills of coordinating the activities of others toward shared goals, among them envisioning, planning, communicating, delegating, and completing. And the skills of problem solving, among them listening, defining, imagining, inventing, and evaluating. We follow Stanford's design school closely here. So as we wrap up this introduction and return to the macro level, we want the boys to transition from primarily being concerned with how they feel at every moment of the day to being doers, concerned more with their efforts that help their world to thrive. In important ways, we are defining manhood for the boys in much healthier ways than they are likely to get from contemporary culture at large. We leverage as much as possible the boys' desire to portray themselves as men. One of the chief ways of doing that is to get them to see that boys are cared for, but men care. Where are you, Johnny, on this spectrum? And how can you engage, serve, and coordinate more and better so that you progress along the continuum? I hope that it's clear by now that the logic of our program is that caring for our world is a win-win for self and world, as opposed to a zero-sum game that merely asks people with much to send some of that much over there somewhere. We are social beings, dependent on the health of our communities for substantial parts of our identity. The care we provide our world is our signature achievement and source of legitimate pride and authentic meaning. When our boys lead ethically, both they and their world benefit. Our program is not overly idealistic. We neither hope nor expect all of our boys to become Gandhi or someone like that. We ask them to think about their relationship to the world's many needs, responsibilities, and opportunities in terms of concentric circles. At the center are those communities that support our boys the most and thus merit the most reciprocal care. Moving out from the center toward the more distant world that remains nonetheless in their sphere of responsibility. So for most boys, their family, school, friends, and teams are at or near their center and call forth the greatest response. But we want the boys to be benevolent and to consider the well-being of everyone when they act, knowing that, as Reverend King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As I said earlier, we have grown the program over the past 10 years and have added a considerable number of elements, both curricular and co-curricular. Here's a list of some of the program's curricular elements, moving from lower school through upper school. In the program's early years, most of the elements were specific to faculty who were early adopters and innovators. As the program has matured, we have secured space for every boy at key grade levels, most notably grades 6, 8, and 10. A pilot online course specifically on leadership should be ready in 2016. Here's a list of some co-curricular activities and clubs, some of which are required of every boy, like the Wilderness Program, some are available to every boy, and some are limited by the space available. To sum up, our program is built around the fact that the world's needs, the boys' responsibilities, and the boys' chief opportunities are the same. That the best way for the boys to thrive and succeed personally is to learn how to help their world to thrive and succeed. We appreciate your interest in our program.